see her.
Oh, I got it.
Are you going back to me? Thank you.
Hey, to go right in front of it, you're okay? Where do I know you from? I could know you. Did you look for, did you used to go to step aerobics?
We're live streaming, so.
Yeah, you was very, you had kids like that? Well, let's see. Well, you might not know, but my kids graduated from there in 2016. Yeah, she's, 17, 22. So we from there? Yeah. Twins, yeah. Oh, there you go.
So, ladies and gentlemen.
We were as bad together.
So, thank you everybody for coming here today. My name is Kevin Smith. I am the owner, funeral director, embalmer, everything that you don't want to hear about. That's me at this place. So, so today we're gonna touch on a few things. One being pre-arrangements. We're gonna also get into estate law and some counseling, grief counseling as well. This is gonna kind of be a more laid-back situation. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to wait till the end or put your hand up right as we're going through. We can answer any questions that you might have. Like I said, thanks for coming, taking time out of your day and coming and meeting with us. And luckily for you guys, the first person you get to talk to is me. So, or first person that gets to talk to you is me. Okay, so as I said, I'm a funeral director and embalmer, owner here at Kettle Valley Memorial. This funeral home we started in 2019, so we're fairly new. And over the last few years, we've, as weird as it might sound, we've experienced some growth. So I think some people in here went to our old building over up on Dawson. Sorry about that, the internet's slow at changing the address. But we were up on Dawson there for a few years, and then just 6 months ago, I believe, we made the move into this building here. So, needless to say, we've grown, we've gotten bigger. We're a big funeral home that concentrates on community and helping out. So, but what I'm going to talk to you guys today is, about today is pre-arrangements. I think we might have somebody else just walking in. So if somebody walks in, we'll just have them kind of see you back. But so yeah, we're going to talk about pre-arrangements. When to do them, what they're meant for, what they can offer families, our families. So pre-arrangements involve making decisions about end-of-life services before they are needed. In the funeral service industry, we have pre-arrangements, and those pre-arrangements at the time of the person's passing switch over to what we call our admin arrangements. These plans include funeral services, whether it be burial or cremation, celebration of life, traditional funeral service, something at home, right? Simple cremation, things like that. And also finances and what does it cost to do a pre-arrangement today? Some people think pre-arrangements cost as much as a funeral. They can. I'm not saying that they can't, but when we do pre-arrangements, we want to lock in costs and we want to get a little bit of a deal when we're doing pre-arrangements. So, a few things when we do a pre-arrangement, what we're doing is the importance of a pre-arrangement, is we want to reduce the emotional and financial burden on our loved ones. We want to make it easier for our loved ones at the time of our passing to be able to, one, deal with their grief, then two, I'll step back. Grief, when there's finances involved, finances can really impact somebody's grief. So we want to be able to take care of those finances so that we're not impacting our surviving loved one's grief, okay? We want to remove the financial burden from our loved ones. We want to ensure that our preferences or what we want for ourselves is done and seen through, okay? There are different types of pre-arrangements. Oh, sorry, does anybody have any questions following that? No? Okay. So there's different types of pre-arrangements. One we call as an insurance pre-arrangement. And that's what we offer here at Kettle Valley Memorial is insurance pre-arrangements. The other is trusted funeral pre-arrangements. I'll touch both on those very quickly. An insurance pre-arrangement is done with our funeral home here. We use a company called True Stage. And you might see in those pamphlets you have, you might see the name True Stage come up. If not, you can ask me about it later. But we use a company called True Stage. And the nice thing about True Stage is they're the ones that handle the pre-arrangement, not us here at the funeral home. You would give us the payment, we would then forward it to True Stage. What that does is they hold that money until the person's passing. They're great with families. They're really, really friendly in the sense of, one, your family doesn't, your surviving relatives don't have to worry anything. We handle getting paid from True Stage. The family doesn't even see a bill. Unless, of course, they want to add some stuff, they might have to pay some things over and above, but for the most part, they don't see a bill. We just deal with True Stage. Second being is with True Stage, you can at no charge, at no penalty, transfer your pre-arrangement. So if you live here in Penticton, you have a pre-arrangement and you decide you want to move to Fino or wherever, really anywhere throughout Canada, that pre-arrangement is transferable. You would just take your pre-arrangement to a funeral home in wherever you've moved to, give them the pre-arrangement, just make sure that they'll honor it. If they say yeah, they just have you sign a form. It's called an assignment of benefits form, which allows, or which tells True Stage, for example, Kettle Valley Memorial is no longer the funeral home handling our funerals funeral pre-arrangements. It's this funeral home. They just take our name off, they put the new one on. It's 100% transferable. You don't, no penalties, no nothing like that.
And it's regardless of what the other funeral home charges?
So it can be mostly with funeral homes. They will honor. If I own a funeral home and you own a funeral home, and we have somebody and she wants to do a pre-arrangement, or she does a pre-arrangement with us, she pays $2,500 to me, she wants to go to your funeral home, she would say, will you honor this? Most funeral homes, 99% of them say, oh yeah, we'll honor that, right? And then, that's why I always say, make sure you ask if they'll honor it. Okay, that's the big thing, because and get it in writing, okay? Get it in writing, because, you know, at the time, even though you said, will you honor this? When your next of kin or your executors come in and they say, oh, mom has a pre-arrangement here. They go, oh yeah, but it's gonna be another $1,000 on top of it. And you can kind of run into some problems, right? Family thought it was I always say get it in writing, okay? Any pre-arrangement that's transferred from another funeral home to this funeral home, it's just right across the board. They don't pay anything. Even if, and I'll get into this a little bit more, but even if it's a trusted pre-arrangement, because legally with funeral homes and their trust accounts, they can keep 20% of the principal and all the interest. We'll still honor whatever that new cost is, right? Most funeral homes will. So True Stage is a really, really friendly company. Just make sure you do your due diligence when selecting another funeral home to transfer to, and also when you do your own pre-arrangements, right? You need to make sure that the funeral home that you're dealing with, you trust. That's the big thing. You trust them to be able to take care of your family at the time of your passing, okay? I'm sure we've all heard horror stories about funeral homes. Everybody's kind of like looking down and shit. Yeah, so I saw him in the back do that. Yeah, that's right. So, and it's true. When we pre-arrange something, we expect that our final wishes are going to be taken care of at the time of our passing, and we don't have anything to worry about. There's been things happening in the past that, you know, may get people worried. Now the legislation is pretty tight where you don't have to worry about that kind of thing happening, okay? So, the other one, and I briefly touched on, is trusted pre-arrangement. That's when the funeral home itself has a trust account with a financial institution in Canada. They would have their own. it's a completely different set of laws. Like I just said, if you decide you wanna transfer, some funeral homes will make you cancel that pre-arrangement, which allows them to keep all the interest and up to 20% of the principal. Okay, that, I've seen it, people get really mad when they find that out. And it's, so here at this funeral home, we don't even mess with that, it's just insurance, pre-arrangements, that's it, that's all. And the nice thing about insurance too is you can take it out on 3, 5, 10, 15, and I think some 20-year policies. So if you decide you wanna do a simple cremation, and there's a little breakdown in that pamphlet that I gave you guys that talks about the different types of payments that you can make. You can pay it all up at once, and then it's done. You own that policy forever, or you make monthly payments on it. You can, I've seen monthly payments as low as $40 a month, right, for 5 years. So once you make that first payment though, you're covered. You're covered, and it just keeps going. We like to do it that way because it's like $40. You don't even notice it really coming out of your account, but you know you're taken care of. If you were to leave here and God forbid get hit by a bus, then you're taken care of, right? So, but with trusted pre-arrangements, it's just there's a lot more. You can lose your money. That's really the way that I look at it. You know where your money is. It's with that funeral home. It's just there's a whole bunch of different hoops you have to jump through to get it moved to another funeral or canceled. Maybe you decide you're not going to die anymore, and you just want your money back. So that's kind of the difference between the two. Okay, just about every funeral home for sure in Canada has a account with TruStage. It used to be called Assured Life of Canada. Now it's called TruStage. They were bought out by another company, but they've still kept everything the exact same, which is really, really good.
Well, true stage makes more sense because you're gonna die.
That's right.
Monday.
Yeah. So, as we said, there's different types of pre-arrangements. There's funeral planning. This is selecting the service type you want, whether it be traditional, memorial, graveside, etc. Choosing urns, caskets, different things like that. Some places, you can also prepay your burial plot. Can't do that here in Penticton. So if you wanted to be buried at the Penticton Lakeview Cemetery, you can reserve a spot, but you actually can't pay. You can't pre-purchase and have it there waiting for you. Other cemeteries, they do allow that, where you can go in, you can deal directly with them, pay for your plot, it's done. Okay. Some of the benefits with doing pre-arrangements right now is we have obviously emotional benefits, right? We know everything reduces stress and confusion for family members, and big one here, prevents disagreements among different family members. As a funeral director, yeah, unfortunately you see it sometimes where death unfortunately brings out the worst in some instances, and you can have families fighting back and forth. When you have a pre-arrangement set in, it clears up a lot of that. They know, okay, this is what mom or dad wanted. There's no discussion. It's already been taken care of.
Could it be contested? Say you had a real pill in the family and said, no, I don't think so.
The pre-arrangement itself cannot be contested. I mean, I'm sure Neil might get into it with you. Wills can be contested, but a pre-arrangement done up by the person to say, no, this is what I want, I've never seen it in my 20 years in funeral
I had
service.
a lunatic that dug her husband up and moved him to a different cemetery to spite him after death.
You want to know something? I've seen it.
Yeah.
It happens, yeah. It happens, and it's, yeah.
That's why, sorry, Kevin, that's why your advanced care plan is so important.
Yeah.
When that time you can't speak for yourself, it's in writing, it's signed.
He was better in the
notarized.
ground.
Oh gosh, no.
They honored his wishes and then she dug him up to be fired.
Wow. Yeah, so having a pre-arrangement might stop us doing that. I'm gonna have you come to all the seminars and you can find stuff. So, yeah.
I might want to address that one.
Yeah.
No moving allowed.
Yeah, so, that's, it, to be very clear, I can't stress enough, when it comes to disagreements with families, when you have a pre-arrangement, there is no disagreements, it's just this where, there might be disagreements of who gets to call the shots, but as far as what mom or dad wanted, it's down in paperwork, it's paid for usually by the person that has passed away, okay?
I guess my question is there a law? I guess you have to honor that contract, that would be the law.
Well, and it falls onto the executor as well. An executor, Neil will go into this, an executor's job is to fulfill, and Neil will clean this up, like I said, will fulfill the wishes of the deceased. Handles their estate, handles their bills, handles their real estate, whatever. With a pre-arrangement, it is the executor or the next of kin's job to fulfill the pre-arrangement. So I would say, yeah, it's their job they have to do it. They can always renounce or say, I don't wanna do it, somebody else can deal with the funeral. I've had that, I've had executors say, you know what? I don't really wanna deal with the actual funeral expenses. I'll have my sister deal with it. We'll ask for that in writing, and then we'll deal with who that, and then they'll handle everything else. They'll handle, banks, things like that. Okay, does that answer your question?
Well, yeah, I guess
Yeah.
essentially it's contract law.
Neil, contract at all? Thanks. That's right, yeah. Yeah. You guys are gonna love Neil when he comes on. Yeah, so, big thing with, let's talk about finances. When we do a pre-arrangement, financially, we're protecting ourselves against inflation. Or the inflating costs of everything. When I started in the industry out here, a simple cremation was, and I use simple cremation just because it's the easiest one to discuss. Simple cremation was just about $1,800, taxes in. Now, you're looking anywhere between $2,800 up to $3,500 in the South Okanagan here. So just in that amount of time, in 12 years, it's gone up almost by $1,000. And we have different things coming into play right now as well, right? Like we have carbon tax, we have all this other stuff right now that's affecting the costs of our stuff, right? So yeah, it affects funeral service, believe it or not.
Down to the Trudeau.
So it's we get to protect things, like we get to lock those costs in today, so that in 30 years, when one of you guys passes away in 30 years, it's good. You don't pay a cent over what's already been paid. It's locked in today at today's cost. Okay. It also allows if you're working through your estate and you're kind of getting everything in order, it allows for good financial planning and budgeting, right? You know, okay, my funeral service is going to cost me this much, the lawyer's going to cost me this much. It can all come together really, really nicely for you. Okay. We'll kind of also just talk about the steps of making a pre-arrangement. So this is one of the most important steps. Is one, selecting a funeral home. I always tell families, make sure that the funeral home that you're dealing with or the funeral home you go to is a good fit for you. You might ask, well, how do I know how a funeral home is, how it's going to fit with me? Well, there's a lot of things. You walk in, do you like the building? Do you like the people? Has anybody gone to a funeral where the funeral director looks like he's next to go into the casket? Right? Exactly. Or you go into an arrangement office and you sit down and you go, man, this room's tight. You walk into a funeral home, it's, funeral directors go for that warm feeling, but really it's a suffocating feeling. I hope nobody feels that way here. So those are like little things that can really help you determine if this is a right funeral home for you. Prices, look at their price list, talk with somebody. You really have to do your own due diligence. In funeral service a lot of people, as bad as it sounds, they come in and they go, listen, I don't deal with death, I don't talk about death, I'm coming to you, I need you to handle it. We kind of hand the reins to the funeral home, and we trust that they're gonna show us the right things that, that we want based on our needs. If we're looking for a simple cremation, we don't want to be shown $3,000 caskets. We don't want to talk about why burial is better than cremation or vice versa. We want the funeral director to hear what we want and give us the options based on that, okay? So that's a big thing with selecting a funeral home, making sure you trust the person that you're dealing with. Is the funeral home, and I'll say this for this, is the funeral home gonna be around in 15 years, right? People ask me that all the time because we just hit our 5-year anniversary. People say, so Kevin, in 10 years, 15 years, you're no longer in business. What happens? Like that's a question. We can get into more of that later, but you have to ask these questions going in. It just helps with, if a funeral home does go out of business, you know, okay, well, another funeral home's gonna pick up a pre-arrangement. It's my choice whether I'd like to stay with them or not, or I can go to another funeral home. Like I said, we can go more into that later. But and I've already touched on this, consulting with the professional, so meeting with the funeral director, asking the questions, and really taking a thorough dive. It's that buyer beware, right? You want to be able to go to a funeral. You're spending thousands of dollars when it comes to whether it be cremation, burial, whatever. It's a lot, right? You want to make sure that you're trusting that funeral home with your money and that person, okay? You also want to make sure that they're going to handle the right documents for you. One of the big things that we do for families we service, we include our estate settlement service. We do not charge for this, and if everybody has a copy of it in the folder. Us here at KVM, we go through all this paperwork, we sign, we fill it all out. We just basically have it so that all you have to do is sign. We even give you the envelopes with the address on it. Mail it away. You'll have to get the postage for it, but we do all the paperwork for you. Make sure they do that for you. It takes them 10 minutes. How long does it take us to do an estate settlement service? Christina, 10 minutes, right? We don't charge for that service. Some funeral homes, this is what I mean with due diligence. You're doing pre-arrangements. Is that included, or is that a service that they're gonna charge you for, or your family for at the end? Because I'll tell you, this is why other funeral homes don't like me. There's pre-arrangements. When you sit down with a funeral director and you have a pre-arrangement, I promise you, I'm like saying this quiet so the people on the live stream don't hear me. But I promise you that somewhere there's going to be an opportunity for an upsell. I hate that. That's why I got out of the corporate world of funeral service. It's all about upsell. In that, no. We need to just give the family what they want. If they want something else, they'll let us know, right? So, like I said, it's all part of that due diligence, okay? Now, the other thing that we need to also look at is legal considerations, including pre-arrangements in your will or in a estate plan. Now, I always tell families when it comes to doing your pre-arrangement, you get there's 3 copies made of the pre-arrangement. 2 go with you, 1 goes with, 1 stays here at the funeral. We keep them in a locked, fire-rated safe, so God forbid anything ever happen, your pre-arrangement is still good. We give you 2 copies, 1 for yourself, 1 for your executor or next of kin. I don't necessarily think you can put your pre-arrangement with your will. I wouldn't necessarily put it into your will. A lot of wills will say, what does it say, Neil? I'd like to be buried or cremated, essentially, at the end. Usually it's the last sentence of a will. So, make sure that the pre-arrangement, please don't put the pre-arrangement, I'm just gonna say, into we always suggest don't put it into a safety deposit box at the bank. Because we've had our families say, hey, we need to get into the bank to get the will, to show that I'm executor. Well, we need to know that you're executor. We need that will to know you're executor before we give you the stuff to go get that will. So there's a lot of, I always thought, just put it in a safe place. You put your pre-arrangement in your freezer with your will. And Neil will get more into that. Okay? So, now, a few misconceptions, and I know I'm taking up a little bit more time than what I said I would. But I'll just kind of breeze through these. If you guys have any other questions, just let me know at the end. Yeah, we want to, where was I at here?
Misconceptions?
Common misconceptions, thank you. Many people believe that pre-arrangements are too expensive, but they're not. Here at Kettle Valley Memorial, one thing that we also do with families is not only do we lock in the cost today, but we also look at where we can save some money, okay? Whether that be through changing our immersion, like we have basically two different pre-arrangement costs at our funeral home. One's at need, one's pre-need. If you want to get in, and here's the thing, the more people you bring, the more the price goes down. It's one of those weird things. But it's very, you're gonna save anywhere with us, you're gonna save anywhere between $500 all the way up to $1,500, depending on what you want to do. And like I said, guys, a lot of funeral homes have that ability to make sure you ask the questions if you go somewhere else, right? Because like I said, we might not be a good fit for you. Somebody else might be. Make sure you ask the right questions though, okay? That's really the biggest misconception when it comes to pre-arrangements.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
I got a hole in the ground waiting for me in Ontario,
Nice.
so would I do a pre-arrangement here, get cremated here, and then shipped away?
Probably the easiest way. Yeah, doing a pre-arrangement here is do you have a will?
I'm working on that, yeah.
Perfect. So your executor then would meet with us and say, hey, listen, we have a burial plot in Ontario. There's two ways they can go about it. One, we can do the cremation here, get everything all done, give them the urn.
Cheaper than shipping a product, right?
Exactly. They fly back to Ontario, I always say, bring the urn, carry on. Don't put it in your luggage. You don't want to arrive and find out your bags in Cuba. So, yeah. So, but yeah, that's the easiest way to go about it. And then they can also get in touch with the funeral home there, or they can just get in touch with the cemetery.
Yeah, that's what I did for my aunt.
Yeah.
I took her ashes to Manitoba, talked to the funeral home, go to our wing. They said, well, you just opened up the bridge for their husband, you know, stuck her in, and there we go.
There you go.
I imagine you might have counted that a lot here because so many people retire here from somewhere.
Tons. We do, I mean, I have a guy right now, this is a different scenario, but I have a guy right now that's driving back from Terrace. He left Tuesday morning, took a body to Terrace. That was pre-arranged, so they locked in everything already. They locked in care, like everything, professional fees, staff services, registration, documentation, even the amount of money it would take for us to drive to Terrace and back. That's been all prepaid, right? That was a tough one because gas prices went way up from when they did their pre-arrangement. But no, it was all taken care of. The family had nothing. They came in, they met with us for maybe 15 minutes. They signed documents, gone. They haven't seen the bill, they won't see a bill, right? And they're doing the graveside service up in Terrace on Friday. So we've done it all over. I've done it all over the world and all over Canada. So
Then there's another question, I guess, now with things going on.
yeah.
My parents bought a plot intending they were gonna be buried back in 1991.
Yep.
And now they're not. Cremated instead, so there's this big plot. I guess that's an arrangement to make with the cemetery. Does the funeral home handle that arrangement with the cemetery as to how many more urns could be buried?
So is it a casket plot or is it an urn plot?
Casket.
Okay. So and where is it in here?
It's in Ontario.
Oh, it's Ontario. So every cemetery has their own bylaws.
Oh.
So it will all be dependent on them. The cemetery here in Penticton, they will allow up to 6 urns to be buried into a casket plot. What they won't allow is you to go ahead and bury those urns into the casket plot before whoever's body is being buried in there. You cannot bury the urns before the body, so you have to wait till that person dies and then you can bury those in. You can put up to 6 single markers on there. So I would suggest
Cemetery.
talk to the cemetery. A lot of cemeteries, I'll tell you guys this too. A lot of cemeteries will, you know, she bought that grave plot back in 1991 for $1,000 maybe. And today it's probably worth way more. Some bylaws will say the only people that can buy, or the only entity or whatever can buy the cemetery plot is in fact the cemetery itself, and they can buy it back at the price you bought it for. Here's a quick non-real story. We did a burial a few years ago of a lady down, she died here in Penticton. We drove her down to Burnaby, in Burnaby, there's a cemetery there called Ocean View Cemetery. There's no ocean. Okay? There's no, you don't see any ocean.
No, there's no,
Where-
my parents are buried there.
Right?
No ocean view.
Her husband died in 1981. She bought the plot, his plot, and the one next for $1,500 each. So I'm sitting there with the cemetery guy, we're waiting for the family truck, and he goes, I said, so just question, what's the most expensive grave you have in the cemetery? And he said, in the Chinese section, there's a family plot, $2.5 million. And I said, well, I was like, holy smokes. And then I said, well, what about these? Because I knew and he said, well, these were purchased by the family, by the wife lady that died. $1,500 each, and he's like, today, if we were to sell these plots today, they would be between $80,000 to $90,000. So yeah, big, yeah.
Can you sell them privately, like?
No, see, this is where the bylaw came in, this is where they started changing the bylaws, because people were telling me, hey, I put my grave plot on the classifieds in Vancouver, you know, and people were going and buying it, because they thought, hey, I own this piece of ground, I'm just going to sell it on Castanet, and then that person dies, they show up to like, hey, this is the grave, and the cemetery goes, no, that grave belongs to this person. They go, no, we paid them $50,000 for this grave.
That's
The
my
cemetery.
costumate receipt. Yeah.
What's that?
That's my costumate receipt.
Yeah, here's my cut. And the cemetery goes, well, no, like, we can't just, they can't do that. And they didn't tell nobody, like, these things are, so,
Is that fraud?
I don't know if it's fraud or just people thinking, hey, I own this plot. Some people come to us and they say, I've had it, they come to me and they think because they bought their cemetery plot, their whole pre-arrangement's good to go. They come in and they say, yeah, no, Dad has a pre-arrangement. Okay. So we go into and we look in the files and go to them, we said, no, I've got nothing. They say, oh, here's the paperwork. And we look and it's, oh, okay, so we bought a grave plot and this happens a lot, bought a grave plot from a funeral home that's on a cemetery. Does that make sense? So they think, oh yeah, everything's all paid up and ready to go. Well, no, he bought the ground. This is still gonna be $10,000 or
So
whatever.
are burials diminishing in number comparatively speaking?
Yeah, overall, yes. In different religious groups, like a lot of Catholic, they still do burial or cremation, but it is diminishing. So
They're changing the rules, Catholics are, there's
Yeah.
been some stuff from
yeah,
the head guy,
yeah. All of a
but it's
sudden,
maybe
it's like-
okay to be cremated, so there'll be more probably.
So I'm gonna retire my time. I'm gonna pass over to Neil now. If you guys have any other questions, we're gonna, at the last about 15 minutes, we're gonna open it back up. So if anybody ask any questions, anybody, please go ahead and do that, okay? So, thanks guys.
Don't normally think of a race.
Well, and you're gonna get more of that too. Wait till you hear Neil's part. I always say it to everybody, law? Oh man, it's gonna be exciting.
So my name is Neil Wiper. I'm a lawyer here in town. We've been in Penticton for coming up on 10 years, I think. The big part of my practice is estate planning and helping families after someone dies. We also do a lot of things that are kind of related to that with real estate or helping people with their businesses, but kind of the core of what we do is estate planning and helping families. And so today, Kevin asked me to talk to you a little about what wills are, why you should have one, what happens when you die, and those kinds of things. So as a starting point, there's a lot of misinformation about what happens if you don't have a will, or even if you do have a will. So it seems like when you watch on TV, if you don't have a will, then the government takes everything. So in BC, that's not true. There's rules that describe when someone dies without a will, what happens to the things they own. And basically, it goes to, everything you have goes to your closest relative. And if you have a spouse, they get the lion's share, but if you have children, then they get a big share as well. And often, that's not far off of what people want in their plan. So lots of times, people want to leave everything to their spouse and their children. The problem is that people often prefer to leave everything to their spouse and then count on their spouse to help their children later on when that spouse dies. If you don't have a will, then that doesn't happen. It immediately part goes to your spouse and part goes to your kids. The other thing is that if you have a will, you have an opportunity to make it clear who your executor is. And so the executor's job is to deal with Kevin and the funeral arrangements, and then collect all of your assets, pay all of your bills, file your taxes, and then distribute things the way the will says. So without a will, there's nobody that has any authority over the things you own. Somebody needs to go to the court and apply to be appointed as the administrator of your estate in order to do anything. And that can be expensive and time consuming and more work than is needed. So having a will can make that simpler. But then it seems also on TV that when people have a will, they just get challenged, it's thrown away, and something totally different happens anyways. Again, that's just TV. In BC, wills are very reliable, especially if they're done properly. The only people that have a right to challenge your will to try and demand a share of your estate are your spouse and your children. Nobody else in the whole world has the right to demand anything from you, unless you owe them money. The other way that more distant relatives might try to challenge a will is they can argue that you didn't have the mental capacity when you made the will, so the entire will is invalid and should be thrown out. Then they're counting on those rules of how things go if you died without a will, so maybe they get a share. But in order to try and get something directly from you, generally it's only spouses and children that can do that. So,
how long do you, can you dispute a will?
It's a little complicated, but if your will goes through probate, then your spouse and children have 180 days from when the grant of probate is issued in which they can make a claim to try and get a bigger share.
Yeah.
Not every will goes through probate, which means that 180-day timer never starts.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So there's some flexibility in there. There's also different rules if someone is claiming that you had, if you lack the mental capacity to make that will, there's a different limitation. So it's a little more complicated, but the bottom line is that having a will is all about giving you control. And so a few things that you might want to think about in your will. So I mentioned taking care of your spouse first. It would be awful if you have a typical or traditional married couple with children. It'd be awful if when one partner died, the other spouse had to give up half of the home to minor children and have the government involved and things like that. So having a will gives you control over making sure that when one partner dies, things can go as smoothly as possible for the surviving spouse, and that eventually everything will go to your children in the way that you want. Now with kids, there's an extra twist. Anyone that's under 19 cannot receive a gift from your will in their own hands. Instead, it has to be held in trust by somebody. If you don't have a will, then that somebody is the BC Public Guardian and Trustee. It's a government agency. Yeah.
Okay. If they are under 19 when you make the will,
When you die.
have to, like when you make the will, do you have to have it worded so that if you were to die, like after they've turned 19, that something in the will needs like rewording? Is that going to be an issue?
So, yes and no. The short answer is that in the part of your will that says anything for that minor would be held in trust, would also need to say how long it's being held in trust. And so maybe it's until they're 19, and then if you die after they're 19, then there's no trust at all, they would just receive the gift.
Okay.
But the other part of that is that a will needs to make sense. If you made it today, it should make sense if you died in the near future, next week, very soon. Because as life changes for you, you can change your will. It's just a document, we can revisit it anytime and make changes as things change in your life. So if you made a plan for your children, as they grow up, that plan might change, or maybe we don't need that trust anymore, and we can take those parts out, or the plan can evolve. The other part is with kids, the default is 19. And if we don't do anything different, the gift is held in trust until they reach 19. On their birthday, when they're old enough to buy alcohol, old enough to buy sports cars, they receive an inheritance of a whole lot of money after the trauma of losing their parents. Often that's a bad idea, so we typically encourage people making their wills to choose an age that's older when they expect their kids will be more mature. And who knows what that might be. It could be 21, it could be 25, it could be 30, it could be 50. You can pick whatever number you want. And the whole idea is that when you make the will and you create a trust like this, you can put rules in that describe how the gift you're leaving for your children is being used as they grow up. Now, the simplest version is to just leave it to the discretion of your executive and just say, I don't know what my kids are going to be like after I die, so you hold the money. It's not yours, it's my kids' money, but you get to hold it, you get to decide how to use it for my children as they grow up. Make sure their life is interesting, make sure the money is used so they can travel and participate in sports and cultural programs and have a rich, full childhood as they're growing up. But it's up to my trustee to decide at what point my child is mature enough to receive everything that's left. And so that might be when they're 21 and they're finishing university. It might be when they're 30 and still not doing well, but my trustee at least is off the hook. So there's a lot of flexibility in how that works. So that's one option. It could also be more prescriptive of, I'd like to give $1,000 a month until the money's gone. Or it could be, I'd like to give a gift when my child finishes university, I want to help them buy a home, or specific milestones like that. So there's a lot of ways that can be written to fit your family and your needs. And so, wills are also important. If there's anybody in your family that has any disabilities, receiving an inheritance can interfere with their benefits from various government programs. It's also a good way to deal with blended families. One surprise for a lot of couples is that if you don't have wills, if two people come together later in life and they each have their own children, then things don't at all go the way you expect. When one spouse dies, some things go to their children and some things go to the partner. But when the partner dies, everything would go to their own kids and nothing goes to the first spouse's children anymore. So things can wind up being really strange, especially if everything is in joint accounts. Because that means that when the first spouse dies, the surviving spouse gets everything, but then their will, or if they don't have a will, everything goes to their children, and it could be that nothing at all goes to the first spouse's children ever. So having a will is really important in blended families to make sure that things go the way you want, regardless of the order in which the parents die. Ideally, we get rid of the race of if this partner dies first, their kids get everything, but if this partner dies first, their kids get everything. We want to avoid that. And we can very easily with different plans of wills.
With regards to disabilities, I've heard tell about Henson's clause. Is that
Yep.
like a federal thing or a provincial thing?
So the name comes from a family in Ontario. That's the name of the court case that dealt with it. But it's the result of provincial programs which are very similar across the country, but they're all provincial. And the idea is that for people with giving money through the government under the Person with Disabilities Program, it's related to the welfare programs. If you have significant assets or income, then the government expects you to spend those assets before you get any benefits. And so if you don't manage what you have carefully when you receive an inheritance, then the government can say, that's fine, you've got money, you don't need our disability benefits, go spend your money, when it's gone, come back and we'll start paying you again. So this idea of a Henson Trust is to set money aside so that it's not that the disabled person's asset. Somebody else controls the money in a way that makes it available to supplement what the government would provide. But it's done in a way that avoids the government treating it as an asset of that child or of that disabled person. I'm going to stop there because it gets really complicated, but definitely if there's someone in your family with disabilities that is getting funding, that's an important thing to think about. Make sure we have a plan.
Particularly why I want a will.
So to shift gears, there's lots more we could talk about with wills, but moving on to what happens when you die. Having a will is a really important thing because the will itself, so if this was my will, this is the legal document that describes what will happen to all the things I own when I die. It describes who would be the guardian for my kids because they're still young, and it also appoints the executor that's going to do all of that work. And so this is the legal document, it's the final answer, this is what it's going to be. But the problem is, nobody else knows that. So if I've died and my executor takes my will, and they go to the bank and they say, hey, Neil's died, I'm the executor, here's the will, I'm going to deal with things, just give me all of Neil's money. Then the banker has 3 problems. So the first one is, they don't know if this is actually my will, or if it's a forgery. Not very common, but it could be. The next problem is, they don't know if this is a good will, or if it's legally defective and they can't follow it. And the last one is, okay, they're satisfied that it's a good will, they're satisfied that it's my will, but they don't know if I made a newer will that replaces it. Because a newer will automatically revokes old ones, but the paper might still be kicking around. So the bank is concerned for those 3 reasons, that if they gave this person, this executor, all of my money, someone else might show up tomorrow with a better will and want that same money a second time. Banks don't want to pay out money twice. So what they do is they say, I'm not going to trust you, I'm not going to trust this paper, go away and get a grant of probate. And so probate is simply the process where we take this piece of paper and we send it to court with a bunch of other paperwork explaining all of my family, all of my assets, kind of what's going on. The court reviews all of that and gives back what's called a grant of probate, which is a court order stapled to a photocopy of my will, and that confirms that this is my will and the person named in it is the executor. Now the court is not appointing that person, and the court is not declaring that this is the plan for my estate. They're just confirming that my plan or that document is the one everyone should follow. So now when my executor goes back to the bank, they're not just holding my will, but they're holding a court order. And so the banker can follow that. They're following what the court tells them to do instead of following a mysterious document. So probate by itself is a really good process. It confirms that everyone's doing the right things. We've got the right person doing the work, and we've got the right instructions to follow. The big problem in BC is that the government decides this is a chance to collect some money. So the BC government, as part of the probate process, collects a fee, called probate fees, based on the value of the deceased person's assets. It's a weird calculation, but you can think of it as 1.4% or $14,000 per $1 million of assets. And so we just add up everything the person owned when they died. Effectively 1.4% is a tax paid to the government. They're careful to call it a fee and not a tax because you only pay it if your will happens to go through probate. So if your assets are organized in a way that your executor can deal with things and not need to get that grant from the court, then your executor doesn't need to pay the probate fees. And that's typical when spouses own everything jointly, when you've got investments like RSPs and life insurance, with beneficiaries named in it, there might be nothing left that requires someone to go through probate. Much of the time, we still have to deal with probate and pay those fees. So one part of estate planning when we're looking at wills is to also consider if there are sensible ways to try and avoid some of those costs. And we just want to be careful because sometimes when we're looking at ways of avoiding probate fees, we're actually creating bigger costs for things like capital gains tax or creating legal risks where we're giving up ownership of things that we don't want to give up yet. So a common one is adding a child as a part owner of a home, or as a joint owner, is one way that parents typically try to avoid probate fees. But it adds the risk that if you own your home by yourself, if you add your child as a joint owner, they own half of your home. They have all the rights as a half owner. If you want to sell it in the future, they need to cooperate. If you want to mortgage it to get some money, they need to cooperate. If you want to paint, they need to agree on a paint color. They could even interfere with who you have coming to the home as a guest. Also, it's their asset. Half the home is their asset. If they get in trouble, their creditors can look at your home, or the half that person owns, as an asset to pay their debts. So adding a home as, adding a child as a joint owner of a home just to avoid probate fees often is a bad idea. It adds a lot of risk and may not have the benefit that you want. If it was a vacation property that you're not living in, that might be a different discussion. But the whole point is, we want to look at your whole circumstances and think about how we can make things go in the ways that you want during your lifetime, as well as after you die. Making sure that you keep control over the things you want to keep control of during your life, and then things go the way you want when you die, with the minimum cost along the way. So I think I'm running out of time here.
Just a quick question.
Yeah.
So if you have like your child joint on all your bank accounts, but not on your house,
Yeah.
and so that the bank accounts don't have to go through probate, just the house or whatever, does the probate fee then is the price of the house, or is it the price of all the other stuff too that's not going in probate?
Probate fees are based on the valued assets that go through your estate. So things that are joint don't go through the estate, they stay in court.
Okay. Or things that are, if it's a beneficiary, even if they're not joint, but they're like
Generally speaking, yes.
TFSA and all that, okay.
Yep.
Okay.
That question comes up just about every time.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
And so there's lots of opportunities to look at ways of organizing things, and there's no right answer for everybody. So it really comes down to looking at each situation and figuring out what makes sense for you.
Here's a if I have cancer, I know I'm dying, I got 3 months to go, can I just, a good valuable consideration, sell my home to my child?
Yes.
So what
So-
does that cost you?
During your lifetime, you can give anything you want to anybody at all. And so, if, like I talked earlier a little about spouses and children applying to challenge your will, if you don't own something when you die, then there's not something for them to challenge in your will. So that's another plan that we can talk about. If someone knows they're dying, I usually encourage people to just enjoy the time they have. But if they really want to look at this, we can transfer assets before they die, avoid probate fees, and potentially avoid some taxes. Sorry?
In contested wells.
Yeah, there's still room, there's other arguments that can be made if someone gives gifts right before they die, then there's other challenges that can be made. There's always lawyers have crafty ways of causing trouble.
Those lawyers.
Those lawyers. But yeah, generally speaking, if you're trying to help your family out, you can avoid some cost by doing things while you're alive. It's just a question of how much you want to do or how much you want to give, and deprive yourself for the rest of your life.
What are the rules in BC for deeding a home over to a relative for good and valuable consideration?
There's no rules. You can give or sell anything for any price. You'll pay property transfer tax on the fair market value, not what you're actually transferring it for.
Okay.
Potentially capital gains tax if it's not your principal residence. But otherwise, you can do that however you want to do it.
I'm curious. I used to work for lawyers many years ago. And the laws changed a lot.
How about if you, somebody dies and, you're the executor and you can't find the original will, you just have a copy? What happens then?
It can go two ways. So one option is, if you decide during your lifetime that you don't like what your will says, you can just rip it up and
Yeah.
just revoke it. So one possibility, if you die and no one can find the original will, one possibility is that the deceased destroyed the will and they didn't want that plan, so we should just follow the rules for intestacy, the rules when someone has no will. The other option is, maybe the will is still the plan and we just can't find it.
Yes.
And so the laws in BC recognize that there's those two possibilities. So there is a process where we can take a copy of the will and we can submit the copy to the court for probate.
Yeah.
But someone still needs to explain and convince the judge or the registrar, is it more likely that the will was just lost and we should still follow this plan, or is it more likely that it was destroyed to revoke it? And that depends on the circumstances. So we can deal with just a copy, but it still leaves a lot of questions and it's not as certain. Having the original will is far better.
So you better have to give the original will to the executor than keep a copy for yourself.
Not necessarily either. Things change, you may not want that person to be your executor anymore,
Yeah.
or you may change your plan, or really, the will is your secret. Nobody has a right to see it, you don't need to show anybody, so you may not want to be putting it out there in the first place. So the key really is just keep the paper as safe as you can.
Yeah.
Kevin mentioned freezers. I tell people all the time, if you don't have a safe or something like that, stick your will in a couple of Ziploc bags so it's a bit waterproof, toss it in your freezer. If you tell someone that your will is in your freezer, once they stop laughing at you, they will probably remember that. Freezers don't tend to move around your house, so they're easy to find.
Yeah.
And if there's a fire, there's a decent chance to survive. So it's not a crazy place. A couple of bags to keep it safe, but otherwise, that can work.
What's the average length of time it takes probate not contested to
So-
be issued? The average length of time for an order of probate to be issued when it's not contested?
It depends on how busy the registry is. Penticton, with all the delays in the court process, generally speaking, it's about 3 months, start to finish. From when someone comes in saying that somebody has died until we have a grant for them. There's a lot of variability, sometimes it could be 6 months or longer, mostly depending on how easy it is for us to find out what assets the deceased owned. Banks are really uncooperative, that's usually the hardest part, is figuring out what balances were as of the date of death, so that we can tell the court as part of the probate
So if you have
application.
share certificates and all that, it's best to have that listed in your will, like to specify.
Not necessarily in the will, because wills don't get changed very often, but having it all organized makes it easier for your executor to identify everything.
Just look at all I'm missing as well, maybe.
Yeah, same filing cabinet even, if they just know, if your executor knows where to look for stuff, it makes it a whole lot easier than if one thing is over here, but somebody else is storing this other document for you, it gets really hard for executors to find
Clear
it.
out space in the freezer.
Absolutely.
So what we'll do is we'll just take a 2-minute break if anyone wants to grab water or stretch your legs quickly. And then what will happen is we'll have Mary come up and talk to you guys about a few things with her book and what she does. Okay? Perfect.
Anyone needs to know where the options are, or get professionals like that. Mayor's gonna be up in just about 2 minutes,
Yeah.
everybody.
Some cards in the table. You just give them a call and tell them that you're here. Then they're given as soon as they can. I think we're booking 3 weeks out.
Yes, so enough time to refresh.
Okay. Yeah. When you get the money, it's, I think, 3 months, 2 months, until you have to do it. So there is a bit of time. Oh, yeah.
You were the education.
No, I'm the driver. Yeah, it was quite serious. I did go back to work for a while.
Yeah, I'll definitely talk about this in here, but you should have some time to deal with it, regardless. When it comes to you, you have some time to shift it into a trust or.
Deteriorating.
Okay, so I don't have to worry that it wasn't done before.
No, you can.
Easy question.
Anyway,
Approximate cost for Wolfram.
anyway, yeah, so.
So we didn't talk about powers of attorney and things. So just a will by itself usually is about $550. Depends on if things are a little extra complicated, if we're talking about trusts and things like that.
Yeah.
Most of the time it's $550. But generally when we're talking about wills, I also encourage people to look at powers of attorney and representation agreements.
Yeah, you.
So let's take care of you while you're still alive. And doing all three, single it's $1,050 most of the time, unless things are complicated. Usually I don't charge extra for that because if you're in that situation, I want to help out a bit. So if it's a fairly typical situation, that wouldn't be any extra.
40-some-year-old son, I still.
It's challenging.
Nobody gets ever alive.
I'm sorry?
Nobody gets ever alive.
I have a weird question. When somebody dies, and one of
Yeah.
the family members will not, lawyers do
Yeah, he's gonna get married.
Lawyers, exactly.
Yeah, and the son will not, or the person will not talk to the lawyer.
He's been engaged for about 7 years.
It's been a year now.
It's challenging, but at some point the executive can apply with work instructions, and judge the order, here's how it's gonna be.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
We have friends who
So they,
live in that
It
area
doesn't-
here in Tammany, they sold.
the beneficiary, you can't just tie it up.
They're now actually.
Yeah,
ready.
yeah.
But
They're ready.
you know, the executive doesn't spend the same money on lawyers and women work, they can help.
And
So
then,
there'll be some
Marilyn and
relationship.
Jeremy.
Yeah, yeah. So programs and everything.
Yeah, everybody, we're ready.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's some point the executive will just talk to us.
Okay.
Yeah.
This doesn't have to wait.
No, 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 yeah.
No, we can wait. 240 days.
And then would you both be around like at the end?
All right, so I'm going to introduce to you guys, this is Mary McHale, and she is a social worker and counselor, also best-selling author. Her book, Finding Your Cape, came out 4 years ago and it's still doing very, very well. She's going to be here today to talk to you guys about executorship and also grief. A little bit on, I'm not going to get into it, but Mare has been friends with me for a few years now. She has been I'll just say in the funeral industry, she's seen many different parts, which I'm sure she'll talk about. She also has been involved with Neil through many of her journey and also with her own will and everything, so she'll be able to shed some light on that, so, okay, thanks.
Thanks everyone for staying around. Feel free to stand up if the chair's got uncomfortable. Like Kevin said, I am a licensed social worker and counselor here in town, and a bit of my backstory on how I got there was I've experienced quite a bit of loss in my own life. So when I was 19, my dad passed away in our home, and then at the age of 33, I became a widow, and just last August, we lost my mom. And I've been sharing my grief journey and my life experience for over a decade now. I used to be on the radio here in Penticton, and I have a YouTube channel, so I've been sharing just my day-to-day and then also life as a widow, and been getting widows from all around the world, you know, appreciating that and being able to see my story in theirs. And then I wrote Finding Your Cape, and it came out in 2020. And then I started to get a lot of people asking me for advice and for help. And I was like, well, I know what worked for me, but I don't really know why or how it would work for you. So then I went back to school and I got my bachelor's of social work. So I'm a registered social worker and a counselor. So for me, it's nice to pair my life experience with some academia and then be able to help people. I really love to have people in to talk about their grief, to talk about loss, to just talk about life skills in general. I see youth who have, say, lost a grandparent, people all the way in their 70s who are just trying to get through the day and want to talk about anything that's going on with them. And also, I really love to see caregivers. So I have a 13-year-old son, Thomas, who has very complex medical needs. He was born deaf, he doesn't speak, he's on the autism spectrum, and he recently just started having seizures, so he has epilepsy. So I truly believe that the unpaid caregiver is like the hero, the unspoken hero, the ignored hero in our country. When I was in school, I did a project on it, and there's over 9 million unpaid caregivers in Canada, and I think that number is very low. I think it's actually a lot higher than that. So I love to see people who are, you know, supporting a parent or a spouse or a child. And it's really tough when you are the caregiver because you're worried about the person who is in crisis. So say like my late husband, it's like, don't look at me, but we do need to look at those caregivers and we do need to take care of them. And I know here at KVM, they see a lot of people come in who have been a caregiver, and there could be quite a lot of like mixed feelings, mixed emotions, and two things can be true at once. So I'm sure we all know a caregiver, and I definitely love to help them and give them a safe space to say what they need to, because often, like I said, if you're supporting someone, you don't necessarily get that help. I was also asked to come in here today to talk about being an executor. So my personal experience, when my mom passed away in August, I am the executor of her will, and it was very unexpected. We thought we had at least another decade with her, and so I was very surprised to be thrown into it. I was getting calls from the hospital before she even passed away, asking me questions about the estate. So it's very jarring, and I feel like you don't even get a chance to breathe, and then you're immediately thrown into that role. So I wanted to share some things. So if you are the person who is going to work with Neil, as I have, and creating a will, some things to consider when you're choosing that executor. Things that really helped with my mom and myself is before she passed away, she brought her will to me, and so I could go through it, and someone else had drawn it out for her, and I had a lot of questions. So then we met with Neil, he walked us through it, he had some questions, we were able to sort of work through those details, and then she also showed it to anyone else who was mentioned in the will. So when she was still here, she could explain like why this person gets this much, which is less than this person, and why. So then when we lost her, everyone was already sort of aware of like what was in there and what was gonna happen. So I think that was really helpful for me. I didn't feel like I had to explain anything to anyone. I would recommend when you're making your will, try not to make it vague, kind of like Neil was talking about, because then there can be confusion. So something seemingly small in my mom's will is the estate is responsible for repairs to her home, and the person who lives there is responsible for the maintenance. But like that could be very ambiguous, like what's a repair, what's maintenance? Like, is the estate responsible for a fridge or a washer, or is it just something big like the roof? So making it as like specific as possible, I think, can really help the executor once you're gone. Also, simplifying what you do with your documents. Like, you know, Kevin mentioned, don't have it in a box at the bank. My mom didn't have that, but she did bank with 4 different banks. So it was like quite an ordeal to find out where all the accounts were. And then there was even questions from someone else saying she banked at a 5th bank. So then I had to ask Neil to write a legal letter to that bank to find out. So there was just, I mean, we didn't expect to lose her, so she wasn't prepared in that way. But even just a list of like, this is where my investments are, these are the banks, like that, even just that would have been nice to start. I would probably recommend that your executor is local, because there's been a lot of in-person things that I had to do. I think that's why I was chosen, because my siblings, one lives internationally and one lives very far away. And understanding when you choose your executor, it is a part-time job. Like, at least mine has been. Like, very involved, a lot of meetings, a lot of work, a lot of decisions. So choosing someone who has that capacity, that energy, and the time, and make sure that they're like good with paperwork, because I know some people have an aversion to that. So there's a lot of paperwork, and that they're good with meetings. And I'm kind of on the fence about like, would it have been better if her executor was, say, an acquaintance or a friend, so not a family member? So for, like I said, for me, we hadn't even lost her and I was already like thrown into that role. So would it have been better if she had pre-planned with Kevin? And, you know, then there was someone else who would have been able to answer those questions. But that being said, it's like a true honor that she picked me. So I do feel like I know I will do everything to the nth degree that she wanted, that she needed, and so I feel that that is nice too. So it's kind of a balance of choosing someone who you think will have your best interest at heart, but also is it going to be too hard for them to do it. And then if you're an executor, one, I would say use Kettle Valley, because we did with my mom, and like I don't even know how Kevin understood what I was saying when I called him, but he was like immediately there, immediately helpful, and so professional. Like, I didn't need him to console me. I needed him to just like, here are the facts, this is what has to be done. And I forget what you called it, but there's like the list of things that you cancel.
KVM Service. Everybody has a copy of that in their file.
I couldn't even put a price tag on how helpful that is, because like
Neil
I
doesn't-
wouldn't have even thought of those things.
Neil doesn't like that thing because we take money out of his
Okay.
pocket, so just so you guys
Well,
know.
close your ears. But it was just incredible that to have that. And then he was very, you know, informative and like, now you do this, here's this, I wouldn't do that, that's expensive, like those types of things, like someone that you really trust. Also, remembering if you're an executor, to just be kind to yourself. Like, it's a tough role, but it's your role and you were chosen for a reason. And so to honor that person, to take it seriously and to take your time, have a good lawyer. Like, I can't recommend Neil enough, the amount of meetings we had or calls or emails, because it's very confusing, and also you're in like a fog of grief as well, right? So to just have someone like, this is their job, they understand probate, and things like, you know, getting the property assessed. Like things that I would have had no idea. To do it, to help in the long run. And then also like if you can contract out accounting, because you do have to file their taxes. And you know, I'll have to continue to file her taxes until we sell her house, however many years that is down the road. So, you know, not having to do everything yourself, like there's no shame in asking people for help. One thing that we did that I think, I don't know if you put it in your will or just something to remember, is we had her mail forwarded to me. So when stuff came up that I hadn't even thought of that I needed to deal with, it was coming to me anyway. And also, even once we had, you know, taken the will to the banks, they were still mailing her stuff to her previous address, so like I never would have gotten it. So just like that was one thing that we found really helpful. You could have it forwarded for a year, you just take the will in and you can get it. We went to Service BC and then took it back to the post office, and it was inexpensive and definitely worth it. And I would also, one thing that I think helped myself and my husband, because it's been a lot of work for us and a lot of emotion and like it's been a lot of our reaching our capacity, because we also, you know, have our son and everything else going on. Is one thing that Neil told me is, as the executor, you can take, what is it, 2 to 5%, Neil? 2 to 7?
Repeat.
Yeah. So you can take like 2 to 5% of the value of the estate as your like wage or your payment. And that just helped, because like my siblings are off not having to do anything, so that just really helped me. I was like, okay, this will, you know, there'll be a little part of it that'll be worth it, because it is a lot of time and it is a lot of energy and effort. And I guess the last thing I would say, when you are the executor, it takes so much time. Like even, you know, Neil explaining probate to me, like everything takes a long time. So if you have people who are beneficiaries waiting to get their portion, it takes a long time. And some people don't understand that and they expect to get paid right away. So again, having a good lawyer who can like really explain it to you, that probate process, the 180 days, all that type of thing, I found really helpful. And again, just reminding yourself that it takes time, because I'm very impatient and wanting to get it done. Does anyone have any questions about being an executor, making your will, choosing one for your estate? Can I answer all the questions without even? Do you have any questions for Kevin or Neil or myself? I guess we can just sort of wrap it up and mingle if anyone doesn't have any other questions.
Perfect.
Question about the beneficiary that you
Yeah,
said.
yeah.
If you're a beneficiary on, let's say, a TFSA account, that's not part of the probate, so the bank should actually give you that money right away
Yeah.
to the people that are the beneficiaries.
Yes, so she had like TFSAs and she had some specific investments that were for beneficiaries, so they're not even part of the estate, so
So
I
it
didn't.
doesn't take 3 months to get that.
I didn't have to do that, the
No,
bank
you
just
get that,
contacts them, they go get their check, so that's,
Yeah.
has nothing to do with the executor, which was nice, cause then that was one less thing I have to worry about. But yeah, it's good, that's a great question.
So TFSAs and RSPs pay directly to the beneficiary, the bank deals with that part. Sometimes though, depending on what kind of investment it is, they can take a while for that to happen. So it can take some time if the bank decides they need to sell the investments, and for whatever reason that's gonna take a while, it could be 3 or 4 weeks. The money doesn't get to them as quickly as things like life insurance. Life insurance usually pays very quickly after someone dies.
And the RSPs, who pays the tax on that? Is it the state then, or like, would they take it right away? Or the RIF, like a RIF?
Yep, so it depends on the institution. But the basic idea is that the deceased person is treated for tax purposes as if they received all the money that's left in the RSP or RIF in the year they died.
Right.
So the deceased person is taxed during their lifetime as of the date of death, as if they had all that money. But in order to pay that to the government, most banks will subtract about 1/3 from the RSP when they're paying it out to the beneficiaries and send the last third to the government. But others won't, they'll just pay the full amount out to the beneficiaries. And if all amount goes to the beneficiaries, there's 2 things that can happen. One is if the estate has enough money to pay its taxes, then the executor will just pay the taxes from the estate. But if there's not enough money left in the estate itself to pay the taxes, the CRA will actually go to the beneficiaries and tell them they got too much money from their RSP payment and claw back. So anyone receiving money from an RSP as a beneficiary, you should be careful and be aware that there might be some tax on the money you received. It's not income to you, it's a windfall. So you don't pay tax on it, but if the deceased person owes taxes, it might be clawed back from what you got.
And then another interesting thing kind of with that is, at least in my experience, there's multiple beneficiaries waiting to be paid out, but now there's not enough money left in the estate to do so until the home is sold. So just because it says it in the will, doesn't mean it's immediately gonna happen, so that's sort of an interesting thing too, to note. And the waiting period between probate ending and then being able to, like 180 days, right? It's just kind of nice too, like to have a little bit of breathing space for the executor, like now I can actually not do anything, taxes have been paid until next year, but,
And
yeah.
one more question, if my beneficiary lives, if one of my beneficiaries live in the US,
Mhm.
is that, cause they have different rules, right, they have different stuff.
I
But can it just be sent as a gift to them, as a, you know? and
I
then-
found it pretty good, like my brother lives in Philadelphia,
Okay,
and he was a beneficiary of one of my mom's investments, and the bank just took care of it.
oh, okay,
And
good to know, yeah.
I found it was just as easy as my sister getting paid.
The institution that's sending the money would deal with the taxes on that.
Yeah.
So there are different rules for sending money across the border from investments. And so the bank that holds the RSP would deal with sending more to the CRA before they send the money to the person inside of the country. Later, when the estate deals with its taxes, there may be money coming back for that beneficiary, but the rule is they'd have to divert the money first.
Okay, so it's easy then, or whatever, and I was told not to put my son, he was in the case, on as an executor, because that can be complicated, because they have different rules in the state, so we just have my daughter on and she's, so.
Yeah, that was another reason why my brother wasn't, it was quite
Yeah.
complicated. And I even had him as part of my will, and then we realized, like, probably just better to have Canadians. Yeah, good question?
Yeah, I'm just curious, and maybe your experience as well, maybe with you, Neil, co-executors, and how, whether it would have been helpful for you to have had a co-executor. Because in my case, my parents have my brother and I as co-executors on the estates. Without divulging too much family information. I'm just wondering whether that is something that A, would have been helpful for you, and B, maybe Neil, whether you find if there's co-executors that it becomes a bigger issue and maybe it would be better to have a single executor.
The simplest answer is it's easiest for there to be one executor. When you have co-executors, everything is done unanimously.
Yeah.
So you're co-signing each check, you're both telling the bank the same thing, you're both dealing with the home. So every step of the way is you doing something and then your brother also cooperates.
Right.
So it's easier if one of you does it yourself.
Right.
But when parents can't decide, it's not unusual for us to put down both or many children as co-executors. And just make sure everyone understands that when the time comes, we're expecting that some of them will renounce their executorship so that one person can just do the job. And that way, as life goes on, the people that are asked to do the work can decide amongst themselves when the time comes, who has the free time to deal with it.
I think it's better that honestly it was just one,
Yeah.
especially because they don't live locally.
Yeah, well, the same in my case.
Yeah, and like, to be honest, we're the ones here dealing with everything, so to have to wait, I don't even know how my sister would co-sign stuff, and, I mean, she's been a great, just like, person to talk to, but everything has come down to me. I think it's easier, honestly. Yeah, because then it's saying like, at the time that people will decide who does what, grief really changes people.
100%, and that's sort of where my discussion with my parents will happen.
Yeah.
And with my brother as well, like, I don't think he wants to be involved anyway, but however, it's currently listed that we're co-executors.
Yeah, so he would
And
have.
I have a little bit of an issue with that.
Yeah.
Only because I am here, he's in Calgary,
Yeah.
and I don't think he's gonna wanna deal with it anyway, but. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
Can I ask one more?
Of course,
question
yeah.
about executorship? I'm also now the executor on my aunt's estate. Her husband passed away. He had children. She's changed the will, and from what I'm hearing, it's probably a good idea to have some of what she's changed the will to in regard to her grandchildren and children, maybe exposed prior to her
Yeah.
passing, so that I don't have that fall on me as the executor, because I think that's gonna be another big family issue.
I think that would be kind to you if she did that.
Another conversation then.
Yeah, because I know someone who actually had to go and physically change the locks to the house because they were the executor, they weren't family,
Yeah.
and the family was like coming in hot, so
Yeah.
that would be a nice, just a gentle, agreement.
The other part of that is, sometimes we discourage people who are making the wills from telling the benefits that they're getting. Just because if you've told someone now that your will says they're getting a share, and you change your mind later,
Oh, yeah.
they'll be that much more disappointed.
Right.
Right.
If they didn't know they were gonna get something and they didn't later, then it's maybe less disappointing. So, it depends on each person whether they want to share that news or not.
Yeah.
But
Well,
it'll probably
and-
be your aunt's choice more than yours.
100%, it'd be a conversation to have with her about, because she's essentially skipped the children and gone straight to the grandchildren. So more having that, maybe known, I don't know, I'll talk to her.
Could she leave something in the will that explains it? Like I know in my mom's it says like, this person's getting this much because of this reason.
It's one of those yes, but kind of answers. Probably more than we can talk about here, but.
Yeah.
It'd be worth third getting some
Trust me.
advice.
No, we'd like to know everything.
Yeah, right, yeah. No, I'm just curious whether there's, I would assume you can have letters written that go along with your will if you wanted to explain.
The problem, the counterpoint is just simply that, like I said, the only people that can challenge the will are spouses and children.
Yes.
If the children are left out,
Yeah.
then it's really the judge's just decision about whether they get something or not.
And in the same case in when it's stepchildren?
Stepchildren don't have any rights.
Okay, because that's the case, right? It's my uncle who passed away, everything went to my aunt, and it's his children from her previous marriage, she's not related to them.
There's more than we can talk about here.
Yes, okay. I will make an appointment, trust me.
One thing to just add about wills, like I mentioned, my son Thomas has a lot of complex needs, so my will with Neil is literally like the thickness of a Sears catalog, like it's so condensed, like so complex, but I know I've already changed it up once or twice, like when I got married, I added my husband in there, but it's just nice to have something. So like if you know anyone who has a child with neurodiversities, like I can't stress it enough, but that's the idea of like either the province getting involved or funding being taken, or like it's gonna be an awful situation as it is, but to have some sort of something in place, so I know the people who are in there, I've told, they know. I just wanted, like from our personal experience, can't stress that enough.
Or pets, you put pets in this?
Oh yeah, you do.
Takes my
You
cat.
absolutely can. Usually, one of the considerations with pets is like a typical cat or dog. Most people outlive their pets and they change over time. So naming that I want to give Fluffy to this person might not be as good of an idea as just saying I'd like this person to become the guardian of all of my companion animals, whatever animals I might have. And then also you can set aside some money to give to that person for food and vet bills and things like that as well.
Trust that they don't just practice.